Hello everyone, if you're new here, welcome. My name is Keisha and today I'm going to be talking about all of the Christian fiction books that I own. So in case you couldn't already tell, I'm doing a little bit of a shelf spotlight series here on my channel. The previous video that I did was spotlighting my Bibles, my commentaries, any Bible resources or theology books that I had. This video is going to be Christian fiction books, and then my next video is going to be Christian nonfiction books. So if you happen to miss the last video and you're interested in watching that one, I'll have it linked down below. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and jump into the Christian fiction books that I have. Now, just to preface this, I'm not a huge Christian fiction reader. In the past, I have read one or two here and there, but ultimately I haven't really delved into the genre. So with that being said, I don't have a lot of Christian fiction books to share with you today, but I would love for you to recommend me some of your favorites down in the comments. So let's just go ahead and start off with some classics, and I have not read these first few. Well, I've read one of them, but I have a few C.S. Lewis books. So the first one I have is The Great Divorce. I really don't know a lot about this one. I actually didn't even know that it was a fiction book, but the back says, "It is not generally known that from hell you can take a day excursion by bus to the bright borders of heaven. The author finds himself in this fantasy, venturing on one of these trips, and learns to his astonishment that the damned are under no obligation to return to hell. They can stay on in heaven if they wish, if they are willing to forego their most precious sins." So this is kind of like a parable, I would say, or an allegory for the subject matter. I, again, have not read this, but it is a classic. You can tell this is like a very worn copy that we got somewhere. I'm not really sure, but it's very worn. So that's that one. I have read his Screw Tape Letters, which is a really interesting read. Personally, I didn't enjoy it as much when I read it at the time, but I'm curious to know what I would think now. I do think it's interesting, and I like how it represents like spiritual warfare that we face and stuff like that, but when I read it at the time, I feel like it was just a little, I don't know if it's the way that it's written or what it was, but it was just a little odd for me. Okay, so this doesn't really tell the synopsis on the back. Let me see if it tells it on the inside. But basically what this is you get to hear like demons are trying to manipulate humans' minds, and like, just like how the devil tells us lies and we believe them, like this is just showing the manipulation and spiritual warfare and stuff. So that's basically what it is. But again, I need to reread it just to see if I like it, because I know a lot of people love it, but just I think it's a personal preference thing for me. And then I have a couple of these. I think both of these are in the same series. Maybe. Yeah, so C.S. Lewis has this space trilogy, and I don't have all of them. This is the second book. It's called Paralandra. And it's the second book in his space trilogy, which begins in Out of the Silent Planet, which I don't have, and is concluded by, so this is the second book, and then the third book is That Hideous Strength. So I have not read either of these, but again, these are like classic C.S. Lewis books. So will I ever get to them? I don't know, but I'm glad they're in our collection. So then I have some C.S. Lewis books that I have read, and again, I have more C.S. Lewis books, but they're nonfiction. But I'm not going to take these out, but I do have the Chronicles of Narnia series. This is a middle grade series, and I have them set up where on my shelves, and I don't know if you can see that or not. I have this necklace that I got that I have taped up here to hang over them, and it represents Lucy by the light post in Narnia, and I just love this. I've never worn this necklace. I just literally wanted it to put on my bookshelves. But the Chronicles of Narnia starts with the magician's nephew. Most people know it by the line, The Witch in the Wardrobe. I have read all of these books except for the last two of them. So I do still need to read those, but this is just a really amazing series and allegory for Christ. You have Aslan the lion, who represents Jesus for us, and just, I don't know, like this is just one of those stories that feels like home. And I think it's partly because you are going through a wardrobe into this world that is fantasy, but it's also symbolizing the life that we have with Jesus. So I just think it's really cool. Obviously, there are lots of non-Christians that read this book and enjoy it just as much too. So I definitely think that that is very universal. But yeah, it's just really good. So now I have another, since we've been talking kind of about allegories. This book is called Hind's Feet on High Places, An Engaging Visual Journey by Hannah Hernard. So this has been illustrated. Originally it wasn't, and I really wanted the illustrated edition because It's really beautiful. I mean, why would you not want pictures in a book that you're reading? Look at this. Like, I love watercolor. Watercolor has been something that I've always thought was beautiful, but in like my most recent years, I've just loved everything watercolor, which you might be able to tell from like some of the thumbnails on my channel, as well as like the little story highlights on my Instagram. Like, I just love watercolor. So I definitely wanted to get this one. And this is basically a story of endurance, persistence, and reliance on God. This is another classic book. I'm not sure when it was originally written, but it's got a scripture in the front that this terminology was based on. It's from Habakkuk 3:19. The Lord God is my strength, and he will make my feet like hinds feet, and he will make me to walk upon mine high places. And then at the beginning of the book, you have a preface to the allegory that explains what it's about. And it follows this deer, I believe it's a deer, and he is called Much Afraid. And Much Afraid is escaping from her fearing relatives. She went with the shepherd to the high places where perfect love casteth out fear. So you can kind of see how the allegory plays in there. I've heard nothing but great things about this one, so I'm really excited to get to it. And then next, I have a stack of romances, some like historical romances, and then some suspense novels. So I'll go ahead and start with the romances. I haven't read this one yet, but it's called The One You're With by Lauren K. Denton. And the reason that I picked this one up is because I really enjoyed a secular book called, After I Do by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I really loved that book, and I'm not saying this is comparable to that or the same thing as that, but something about this reminded me of how much I like that book, and so I really wanted to read this one. The synopsis says, high school sweethearts Mac and Edie Swan lead a seemingly picture-perfect life in the sleepy, sweet community of Oak Hill, near Mobile, Alabama. Edie is a respected interior designer, Mac is a beloved pediatrician, and they have 2 great kids in a historic home on tree-lined Linden Avenue. From the outside, the Swan family is the definition of the good life. And life is good, mostly, until a young woman walks into Mac's office one day. A young woman whose very existence threatens all Mac and Edie have built and all they think they know about each other. 19 years after a summer apart with a family and established lives and careers, the past that Mac and Edie thought they left behind has come back to greet them. For the first time, constants in their lives are called into question. Their roles as parents, their reputation as upstanding members of the community, and the very foundations of their marriage. As they wade through the upheaval in both their family and professional lives, they must each examine choices they made long ago and chart a new course for their future. Next up, I have Dear Henry, Love Edith by Becca Kinzer. This is a probable choice for a future Revived Book Club pick. This is one that I've heard nothing but great things about, and I'm really excited to read it, hopefully sooner rather than later. But this is a book about Henry and Edith. And I believe Henry gets a call from his niece or something. Is it his niece? Yeah, it's his niece. So his niece basically asks him, like, hey, Henry, I know this widow and she really needs a place to stay. Can she come and stay with you? And he's like, sure. Well, when you hear widow, I think a lot of times, even though we shouldn't assume these things, we assume that this person is probably elderly. And that is what Henry does. He assumes that Edith is elderly. But Edith all the H's. Edith also presumes or assumes that Henry is elderly. So they're living in the same place, but they have different schedules, so they're not really seeing any of each other. They just happen to be at the same place. And Henry and Edith end up meeting out in public and falling in love, but they don't realize that it's the person that they're living with. So they start like writing letters to each other in their home, telling each other about themselves, about their love interests, not realizing that they're actually talking to each other, if that makes sense. This just sounds like a really cute story. I love it, and I feel like it's going to be a good time. Like I said, I've heard nothing but great things. The next book that I have is The Happy Life of Isadora Bentley by Courtney Walsh. Now, you may recognize Courtney Walsh's name. She's written a lot of books. She's written some under Thomas Nelson. She's self-published some books, and I don't know if she's written under any other publishers, but she is a pretty well-known clean romance author. This book is also a romance, but I think it focuses more on the character of Isadora Bentley and how she grows as she is turning 30 and feeling like she's not exactly where she wants to be in life. So that's all I know about this book, but I will say also, I'm not sure if Courtney Walsh's books are all Christian fiction. I assume they are, but just in case you're wondering if you're wanting to read them, they are all clean romances and clean reads, so you can at least bet on that. The next book that I have, I almost unhauled, and then I found out it was Christian fiction, and I am really interested in this one. I just haven't picked it up, so I'm going to hold on to it for a little bit longer, and that one is Dearest Josephine by Caroline George. The synopsis of this one is really intriguing. In 1821, it says, Elias Brock has ghastly luck with women. He met Josephine DeClaire once and penned dozens of letters hoping to find her again. Then you jump to 2021. Josie DeClaire has questionable taste in boyfriends. The last one nearly ruined her friendship with her best friend. Now in the wake of her father's death, Josie finds Elias's letters. Or Elias. I'm not really sure how he pronounces his name. But anyways, suddenly she's falling in love with a guy who lived 200 years ago, and Star-Crossed doesn't even begin to cover it. So I love that this book includes letters. I'm not sure how this romance is going to work. That is like over time. It bridges time there. I'm not sure that there is time travel in this or not, but it definitely jumps in timeline. So I'm intrigued by this one. I also really love how the cover of this one looks embroidered. So I may give this one a try. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it, but I'm definitely more intrigued now that I know that it is Christian fiction and it's a little bit historical. Then I have a couple other books. This one is a romance, but it's also a little historical. That is Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. I have read this book. If you have not read this one, you absolutely should. It's going to mess you up in the best way and probably make you cry. But basically, this is the story of Hosea told in, I don't want to say modern day, because obviously by the look of her outfit, it's not in modern day, but it takes place in a more modern time than Hosea did. So this is basically just a story of God's redeeming love for us and how that's represented. It's a retelling of the story of Gomer and Hosea, and it is just a life-changing story of God's unconditional and redemptive, all-consuming love for us. California's Gold Country, 1850. A time when men sold their souls for a bag of gold and women sold their bodies for a place to sleep. Angel expects nothing from men but betrayal. Sold into prostitution as a child, she survives by keeping her hatred alive. And what she hates most are the men who use her, leaving her empty and dead inside. Then she meets Michael Hosea, a man who seeks his father's heart in everything. Michael obeys God's call to marry Angel and to love her unconditionally. Slowly, day by day, he defies Angel's every bitter expectation, until despite her resistance, her frozen heart begins to thaw. But with her unexpected softening comes overwhelming feelings of unworthiness and fear. And so Angel runs, back to the darkness, away from her husband's pursuing love, terrified of the truths she no longer can deny. Her final healing must come from the one who loves her even more than Michael does, the one who will never let her go. I also have another Francine Rivers book. This is actually my grandmother's copy, and I really need to get to this series because my friend Jordan really loves this one, so I need to pick it up. This is the first book in the Mark of the Lion series. It's a trilogy, and this is A Voice in the Wind. I don't really know what this one's about, and honestly, like, this time period is not my favorite to read about. The only thing I know, on the back it says, torn by her love for a handsome aristocrat, a young slave girl clings to her faith in the living God for deliverance from the forces of decadent Rome. It's also a thick book, so I'm not really sure. Like, I'm definitely scared of this book, but I've heard so many good things about it, so hopefully one day I'll get to it. And lastly, I have a stack of some like suspense horror books. I think this one, well, maybe it's still suspense. I think they're all suspense, but this one is House, The Only Way Out Is In by Frank Peretti and Ted Decker. I have read 3 by Ted Decker before, and it was really good as far as the twist goes. Like, it was phenomenal. I have no idea if I'm going to like this one or not. I know my friend Caitlin really likes this one, and it says it's a mind-bending supernatural thriller. Frank Peretti and Ted Decker, 2 of the most acclaimed writers of supernatural thrillers, have joined forces for the first time to craft a story unlike any you've ever read. Enter House, where you'll find yourself thrown into a killer's deadly game in which the only way to win is to lose, and the only way out is in. The stakes of the game become clear when a tin can is tossed into the house with rules scrawled on it. Rules that only a madman or worse could have written. Rules that make no sense yet must be followed. 1 game, 7 players, 3 rules. Game ends at dawn. Next, I have a Colleen Coble book. I've heard that she is like the queen of romantic suspense. So this is called A Stranger's Game. Probably more of a summer read for me based on the cover, but this is the one of her books that I wanted to try that sounded most intriguing to me. It says, a wealthy hotel heiress, Even though Tori Bergstrom hasn't been back to Georgia since she was 10, she's happy to arrange a job for her best friend at one of the family properties on Jekyll Island. A suspicious death. But when Tori learns that her best friend has drowned, she knows it's more than a tragic accident. Lisbeth was terrified of water and wouldn't have gone swimming by choice. A fight for the truth. Tori goes to the hotel under an alias, desperate to find answers. When she meets Joe Abbott and his daughter rescuing baby turtles, she finds a tentative ally. The more Tori and Joe dig, the more elusive the truth seems. One thing is clear, someone will risk anything, even more murder, to keep their secrets buried. And lastly, I have 2 books by Jamie Jo Wright. I have The House on Foster Hill and The Curse of Misty Wayfair. Both of these books have incredible synopses, and I've gotten so excited about both. I did fully read The House on Foster Hill. I would say to look up triggers for this. Some of the triggers are going to spoil what's going on in the story, but just know that if anything like sexual assault or things like that bother you, then maybe steer clear of this one because that's a main theme in the story. But this was a good book. I just felt like the synopsis was so much more interesting than the story itself. It felt very slow and boring at times, and that was really unfortunate for me. Overall, I did enjoy it, and I gave it 3 stars, but it just wasn't a favorite. Then I read the synopsis of The Curse of Misty Wayfair, and this sounded so good. It's about this girl who was left at an orphanage as a child, and she always vowed to find her mother someday. Then she starts searching for her. She ends up at a mental asylum looking for clues. She starts using her experience as a post-mortem photographer to gain access and assist a groundskeeper in photographing the patients and uncovering the secrets within. That sounds super interesting. Then you have a century later, this girl is receiving letters from her mother who's battling dementia, and that compels her to travel to see her mother and to search for answers for her own questions of identity. So you have 2 women across time seeking answers about their identities and their heritage. They must overcome the threat of the mysterious curse that has them inextricably intertwined, because there is this long-standing story of Misty Wayfair, and she is like this ghostly woman that haunts this asylum, and nobody really knows why or what it's about. There's speculation, but anyways, this sounded really, really good. But I was bored, so I DNF'd it. But I kept it because I'm going to try again in the future. I'm determined to like Jamie Jo Wright because she reminds me so much of Jennifer McMahon in that she writes these stories that have dual timelines. They're suspenseful. They're paranormal in theory. Jennifer McMahon's are probably a little bit more actual paranormal. I think these are going to have more of like a Scooby-Doo effect where you think it's paranormal, but it's actually not, because these are Christian fiction. But I really want to love her, so I'm going to keep trying. And that is all of the Christian fiction books that I have on my shelves. Like I said, I don't have a super ton. I've just started to collect some. I've read a couple. I haven't read most of them. I'm intrigued by them. I'm nervous to read them because I don't know if I'm going to like them. I think the reason that I've steered so clear from Christian fiction for so long is I don't want to read cringy stuff. And I know that's subjective to the person on what you consider to be cringy. But there's some things that are just like too hokey or too, I don't know, like, I don't even want to say like too Christian, but sometimes you like can over spiritualize things, and I want to avoid that too, because realistically when I walk through my life, like, do I think about Jesus every day? Yeah, to some extent, like, he is in everything I do, but I'm not just like, maybe right now in my life, but I'm not just like constantly, I don't know. Maybe that sounds bad to say it like that, but does that make any sense? Like, sometimes these books just push so much that it's like, okay, like, let's be a little bit more realistic to the mass majority of Christians, but that may just be a me thing. And then other books don't have enough of it, I think. So I don't know. It's just kind of a balance, trying to find things that are good, trying to find not like super cringy romances that are just more hokey than they are actual romance, and different things like that. So I'm hoping that some of these that I haven't read will be really good ones. But like I said, if you have any recommendations for me, definitely leave them down in the comments. I typically am going to like more, I think, like Christian romance books and then suspense books. I'd really like to find more like thrillery books. So yeah, not super huge on historical. I'm gonna try a couple of fantasy, but I'm not super huge on those either. So I would say romance and thriller suspense recommendations are what I'm looking for. If you've made it this far in the video, go ahead and leave a bird emoji down below. Whatever bird of your choosing is fine. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye, friends.